Let's bring in Cliff Maloney, my friend from Pennsylvania. Cliff is running something called the Pennsylvania Chase. This is interesting. Cliff, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you all having me. Glad to be with you.
Absolutely. I hate that hat, by the way. This is terrible, terrible hat. You're on a Minnesota show.
I got to play to my
you.
audience here. I got to play to my audience.
Okay, there you go. All right, I want to read a story from Politico. You've probably seen this. It's called "The Actual Electoral Map is 3 states. If the former president wins the East Coast trio of Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, he will go back to the White House." It's actually interesting North Carolina is even considered a toss-up right now, but we all know the dynamics. But essentially, we've been saying this: Pennsylvania, Georgia goes to Trump. It's over. If Vice President Kamala Harris can't carry Pennsylvania, her only hope is on a Southern strategy. Harris must win either Georgia or North Carolina. She has no other path to the White House. The election could well be determined when polls close in the Eastern time zone. Cliff, is this your read of how this election is going to go?
Yeah, I think that the path for both candidates, if they're able to pull in Pennsylvania, it becomes much easier. And honestly, if you lose Pennsylvania, the path for both Trump and Harris becomes extremely difficult. I mean, even Nate Silver, who I tend to not agree with on policy, Nate Silver says, listen, if Trump wins PA, he has a 96.1% chance of winning the White House. And so, when we launched this PA Chase program, Jake, I had no idea, if Pennsylvania would be that relevant, maybe number 5 or 6 on the list. This is ground zero, right? This is where the election will be decided. That changes cycle to cycle. But right now, I think that's why they hosted the debate here. I think both teams realize this. And I think it's why you see both Harris and Trump spending so much time in the Keystone State, because this is where they win the White House.
Well, it's not just that the American politicians are paying attention. Let's go to the next exhibit. Was at the C2, Dawson. Apparently, it's drawing the attention of the leader of Ukraine. Here's a video. This is the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and then Bob Casey, the senator, clapping, looking really awkward. He looks so awkward in that picture. Look at that. He shakes Zelensky's hand. There's Zelensky, Ukrainian's president / comedian. They're signing bombs. They're signing bombs that are made in Pennsylvania, funded by you and me, in an obvious campaign stop. I believe Zelensky even spoke ill will about Trump. I mean, he knows where the gravy train is. It's on the Democrat Party funding this Ukrainian war. So it's drawing the attention not only of the politicians in the United States, but Zelensky's putting it on the map.
Yeah, and I think this goes to show you the left is absolutely not the party of peace anymore. I can't find a mainstream anti-war Democrat if my life depended on it. And so, yeah, I think they're pulling out all the stops. Bob Casey, it's funny you call him awkward and weird. He's kind of the politician that can win 10, 20 years ago before social media, before you had to interact. He's kind of just had his dad's coattails for years. But he's actually in a race that's going to be tough himself. I mean, Dave McCormick, I didn't think Bob Casey was beatable 2 years ago. But he's in a neck-and-neck race there as well. And look, any of these polls that are coming out, they're within the margin of error. But luckily for us, I look at polls as kind of the third most important metric. Number one being votes, obviously, but the second one being mail-in requests. And, when we look at the numbers, we feel very optimistic. We're tracking this like hawks. We're looking at this minute by minute because all that's public data. And so when we look at the returns coming back, we feel very confident about the potential for Trump to win in PA.
What's the are they doing it on a daily basis that they're updating these numbers?
Yeah, so right now we're getting both registration and the mail-in requests weekly. The numbers I'll share with you that are, giving us hope. Kamala is just completely underperforming Biden in terms of where he was in 2020. Now people say, Cliff, there's a pandemic. All these lefties go nuts on Twitter, and especially the Republican establishment, calling us out and saying that we're cherry picking. Well, compare it party by party. I mean, both parties had the pandemic in 2020. Right. It wasn't a different environment for different parties. And so the Democrats are down about 360,000 mail-in requests. And for anybody out there, let me just give you the basic rundown. In Pennsylvania, you have to request a ballot. Anybody can, it's no excuse, but you do have to request it. We don't just send out ballots to all registered voters. And so what I'm saying is you look at how many Democrats requested a mail-in ballot at this time in 2020 versus now. They're down 360. The Republicans were only down about 70,000. And so if you look at the delta, that's a 290,000 mail-in request margin that we're better off compared to 4 years ago. And so I don't care about the pandemic because we know that those that have a mail-in ballot are much more likely to vote. So Democrats now have to spend more money, more time, more energy, more infrastructure on getting those 290,000 net, or we'll say 360,000 that haven't requested it, to now make sure they show up, which was the problem Republicans have had because we haven't touched mail-in ballots. We focused on Election Day. And the example I give, Jake, is if you're in a sales competition and you say, hey, I'm going to focus on one day, the last day, but everybody else gets 50 days to do their sales, you better have a heck of a day on that last day to pull it off. That's changed in 24. We are now focused. We are doing any type of way to vote, make a plan, and I think it's going to be the difference, especially in Pennsylvania.
Well, and Trump himself was saying, right, do not vote early, vote on Election Day. So it's not just that there wasn't a strategy. It was like literally the candidate himself saying, go vote on Election Day. I think something that he's realized was a mistake. And so to me, it's like, okay, if Pennsylvania is the most important state out there, I don't know if there's any argument. Do you think there's any argument on that, Jesse? You look at this.
No, I don't think so. And, I do have one quick question for Cliff. Those were some good stats comparing it to 2020. I mean, if we look at 2022, Pennsylvania had a rough election with Doug Mastriano. What would you say the numbers are looking like in comparison to 2022? Was it just a low turnout Republican year in 2022 in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, let me give the raw numbers, then we'll talk percentages. So in 2020, Biden had 2 million mail-in votes. I'm not talking requests now. So Biden had 2 million mail-in votes compared to Trump's 600,000, but that's a presidential year. There's COVID, et cetera. 2022, look at Oz and Fetterman, because that was a real race, right? Mastriano, very much underfunded. Josh Shapiro, more money than God, et cetera. In 2022, Fetterman had 1 million mail-in votes to Oz's, let's say, 200,000 and change. So there's that huge drop-off. So a lot of people are looking, saying, okay, what is it going to look like in 24? So now let's go back to requests, comparing 2022 to 2024. Democrats are up 19% if you look at 2022 this time compared to today. Republicans, if we're wondering, did they learn their lesson, we are up 85% from where we were at this time in 2022. Once again, talking requests. So, yeah, there's a shift. Both parties have increased because of the drop-off during the midterm, coming out of COVID. But I think those are all numbers to look at. And we're not going to win mail-in voting, right? I want to be clear for people that hear me, like, well, you guys have this huge program. Are we going to win? No, the cultural differences are still problematic. And let me explain that timeline, because I think most people, Trump included, myself included, this was the environment or the culture that was created. In 2020, we all said, don't vote by mail, way too much potential for fraud, vote on Election Day. 2021, we said maybe the courts will fix it. They didn't. 2022, we said, hey, well, the lawmakers might fix it in Pennsylvania. Well, we lost the state house in 2022 by 1 vote. So they didn't change anything. In 2023, we got our ass kicked, and we said, okay, what do we have to do to change here? Because we can't just forfeit the election because we don't like the rules. And so those are the types of things that I look at. I think the numbers are moving in the right direction. But the nice thing for us is the variable I don't control is the Democrat mail-in votes, right? The Democrat mail-in requests. And so they've kind of handed us a gift in that their energy and their requests are so down that it's made us, even just staying close to where we were in 22 and in 20, extremely valuable. And Jake, one thing I'll do that nobody ever does is I'm going to give you a public number for everybody to hold me accountable to. Republicans in statewide elections, Republican candidates versus Democrat, typically have an average of 20% of the mail-in share versus the Democrat 80%. Our whole PA Chase program, 120 full-time chasers on the ground right now. They've been out since September 1. We're knocking 500,000 doors, talking to Republicans that have a ballot. Our objective is to take that 20% and increase it to 33%. If we do that, we can't lose PA, and we fix the problem. We've totally just changed the culture and the ability for Republicans to compete. But last point I'll make on that, if we get to 25, 26, 27%, Trump could still win. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want to just have a Band-Aid here or a temporary solution. If we get to 33%, we fix it. I want to keep that bar there. And if we get even close to it, we cannot lose PA. That's what I'm aiming for.
Well, I think this is very similar to what you hear about, like the African American vote, the Hispanic vote. It's that Trump's not going to win those, but he's taking enough of that traditional block of voters away from the Democrats, or Kamala in this case, and that alone is going to swing the election. We're talking about, tens of what was Pennsylvania? What was the margin in 2020? It was what, tens of thousands?
80,000 votes.
80,000. Yeah, we're talking about well within the margin of victory. And by the way, 2020 historic election, right? The majority. I mean, like, I know in Minnesota it was the highest turnout ever, or at least since World War II or something like that. I'm guessing Pennsylvania was the same way.
They claim our turnout was 79.96% in 2020. That's what the Secretary of State claims.
Yeah.
79.96, 80% turnout.
By the way, that's Liberty Longbeard. You guys go back, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Can't miss that face.
Okay. So let's talk about what's going on in the ground here. First of all, the Pennsylvania Chase utilizing door knockers with a bias. Should I be saying this? A bias towards Liberty districts, stuff like that. Areas where probably would get more bang for the buck. Is that correct?
Yeah, so here's the breakdown. When we first looked at this, I'll give you a couple of the parameters I set as a Liberty guy. I've never done the Team Red stuff. This is new territory for me. And so I did have a couple, riders on my agreement that I needed to get some folks to agree to when we were asked to do this. Number one, I said, well, let's look at the numbers. Is this even possible? And what was crazy to me is there's one stat I want to share with your audience. Trump lost by 80,000 votes, but this is 2020. There were 141,000 Republicans who requested a mail-in ballot and never sent it back. That was like alarm bells going off. Like, hold on a second, what? 141,000 of them who went through the process of requesting it, they never sent it back. Why didn't they? Because the Republican establishment failed. Ronna McDaniel had no plan. Nobody talked to these people, right? There were no full-time ballot chasers. Sure, there were the grandmas that went out on Sunday or Saturday afternoon for 3 hours, which we love, we appreciate, they make a difference. Democrats are serious people, right? They're hiring full-time canvassers to go out and pound doors 6 days a week. That's the strategy we're matching. And so I want to say that it really isn't about, how many volunteers you get. That's padding the numbers. But Democrats have a full blitz operation that we have to match. Now, back to your question of where we're targeting. Trump and all the other statewide candidates, they love us. We're knocking 500,000 doors, and guess what? They're on every ballot. So they're agnostic to where we knock because we're turning out their voters. So my second thing I said is, look, the data's there. I don't want to get involved in the project we can't succeed at, but let's really focus on who we're helping down ballot. And so pretty much we've targeted, there's 203 state house seats. And so we are spending our resources on Liberty legislators that are tested, that are vetted, that are interviewed, and that are going to fight against the rhino establishment. And we're running up the numbers in their districts. So if you look at the priorities, obviously the statewide tickets, they benefit from every door we knock. Below that, we want to flip the state house by helping Liberty candidates get across the finish line in some of these general elections. Another priority we have is Scott Perry. Scott Perry is former Freedom Caucus chairman, by far our best member of the federal delegation in PA, and he's a top target of the DNC. We think they're going to spend $10, if not $20 million to try to take him out. And he is a very tough opponent. So we've been able to kind of finagle where we are in the state. We have 10 Airbnbs throughout the state. 3 of them are legitimately in Scott Perry's congressional district. So you figure 30% of our entire effort is focused on making sure Scott Perry gets reelected. So yes, this is a Liberty program. We've got ideologically aligned activists that care about the principles. That's always been my brand. It's always been Justin Rice's brand. And so we're just figuring out a way to mold this that helps our people, but gets us national attention and national support, because obviously at the top of the ticket, you have a Senate seat and you have the White House. And Pennsylvania, I truly believe, will decide those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right, so I don't want to go through the polls. We've gone through the polls a lot. Everything is neck and neck. It's very close. Although I would make an assumption that Trump is once again going to outperform the polls like he did in 2016, 2020. so maybe he's the leader. But the current polls show him maybe with a slight advantage in the Sun Belt, okay? Looking like he possibly wins Arizona. Looks like he wins Georgia. So then the big stuff in play right now is the upper Midwest, and they loop in, I don't consider it upper Midwest, but they loop in Pennsylvania because it's somewhat similar, I guess, to Michigan, Wisconsin. I guess Minnesota is not really considered in the battleground states. So I don't assume the issues are the same over there. What are you guys seeing at the door? What is motivating people right now in Pennsylvania?
Well, I'm going to say this, and it's probably not good fodder, because it's not going to be sensationalism. It's pretty boring. These are the simplest doors we've ever knocked. And here's what I mean by that. If we're in a primary where we back a Liberty candidate trying to take out a rhino scumbag, that's tough at the door, because a lot of times they're incumbents, and a lot of times you're trying to get a Republican to, who voted for the incumbent before, to not vote for them. It's a lot of advocacy issues, trying to really create a narrative to explain how this Republican is better than that Republican. And even in typical general elections, we're talking to swing voters, right? If we're backing a Liberty candidate in a general, that's none of this, right? This is going to the door of somebody that has a ballot sitting there and saying, Bob, you've got a ballot. We need you to vote Republican up and down the ticket. Can you confirm that you're going to send it today? And here's what the Democrats, this is, by the way, we got a hold of their whole playbook. And people think it's kind of like, oh, well, why do you say you're stealing their strategy? Because it's honest. That's what we're doing. We're not rewriting this. This isn't some rocket science that, we're creating. They go to the door. They ask them, will you vote today? We track all the data when they say yes. And 7 days later, we pull the report from the county clerk. And if they haven't voted yet, guess what? We go back to the door. Right? And you knock again. Bob, hey, this is Cliff. I'm back here. We checked with the clerk. Your ballot's not in. Do you mind sending it? We know you said you would. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, we're working. I'll get it. Look, was busy. I'll get it in. It's the simplest conversation ever, but people need that ping, that reping.
But what's motivating these guys? I mean, obviously, if they're demotivated, they haven't sent in the ballot. What motivates them? Is it the economy? Is it the border? Like, what is the issue that's really getting these guys moving?
Yeah, and I got to be honest, I actually give credit to Trump. I a month and a half ago was worried that we'd struggle to define Kamala Harris. I think a lot of people, there is fear there. They fear her policies. I don't mean fear mongering, but they fear kind of what would come of America if she's in. So yes, the border's a major issue. Inflation, economy, putting food on the table. I mean, there's nothing new here, right? Those have been the issues. Obviously, the border is becoming an issue. So yeah, we'll talk about those when we're at the door. But most of these voters, they're motivated to vote for Trump. It's just getting them to vote. And this is why I have an issue with a lot of the polls. The rules have been changed in so many of these states. The voters are out there. It's not necessarily even convincing your voters or convincing somebody to support Trump. And the same thing on the left. They're not even convincing somebody to beat Kamala. You're just trying to get your votes and run the score up. I mean, think about this. In our lifetime, Republicans have always been the high propensity voters. That's always been the case. Republicans take Election Day seriously. Our voters are much more higher propensity to vote. This is the first time, if you look at 22 maybe, but definitely in 24, this is the first time ever that the more people that vote, the modeling is showing it's going to help Trump. Meaning a lot of these Republicans are now, they changed the rules. And when they changed the rules, obviously the Democrats adjusted. And so a lot of their low propensity people, because of the new rules, are now the most likely to vote. And so I just share with people, a lot of this is not even advocacy anymore. It's just the Democrats in their training call it the power of annoyance. That's literally what they talk about. Is in sales, they say you got to have 7 touches to be able to make the sale. That's how the Democrats are running their elections. Go back to the door, send them a text about their mail-in ballot, call them, send them a postcard, go back to their door again. That's the strategy. It's not so much the advocacy. Obviously, they have to be motivated on certain issues. But this really becomes just a turnout game, but it's not just Election Day turnout, right? It's getting them to vote any way possible, and I think that's the name of the game.
All right, I got a question that's going to be a little bit outside your wheelhouse, but humor me. But before we move to that, what is the website so people can learn more about the Pennsylvania Chase?
Sure, pachase.com. And if folks want to download our app, they can make phone calls, send texts, postcards remotely. It's just PA Chase in the Apple or Android store. And Jake, my plug here is if anybody wants to sponsor a full day of ballot chasing for one of our ballot chasers, it's $175. Every dollar goes directly towards their pay, their housing, their gas cards. We don't take any commission. None of that goes towards my salary. But that's at pachase.com if folks want to be a sponsor.
Okay, awesome stuff. And I know I've talked to you a little bit. We got some donors over here in Minnesota like, hey, we want to help out in Pennsylvania. All right, you're obviously very much doing the smart work, right? Okay, in politics, a lot of people talk about the independents. Oh, it's about where's the undecideds going, you know? It's like sometimes it's really about getting your base out there. So kudos to you for understanding that and doing a good job. However, there's got to be tens of millions of dollars spent, I don't know, maybe a day every week for certain, probably every day, because everyone reads Pennsylvania is the top state. And there's, I don't know, 3 to 5% undecided, whatever the hell that means. There are undecided people in Pennsylvania right now. They don't know how they're going to vote from now until Election Day. And so you got all this. What are you seeing on TV? Because in Minnesota, okay, I mean, we turn on the Sunday games. We see a couple Kamala commercials, okay? We see those most likely because they're reaching into Wisconsin. You know, we've got the Western Wisconsin market. You see some bumper ads on YouTube, maybe some of the other streaming services. You might even see some Trump stuff. But for the most part, you're not getting ads here in Minnesota, right? Pennsylvania's got to be where every dime is being spent right now. What do you see messaging from both Trump and Kamala? What is working, or what is the perception that's working in Pennsylvania right now?
Well, first I'll say this just to be honest with everyone. I think most people are reaching for their mute button on the remote. I mean, anytime I'm anywhere, whether I'm, you know, at home in PA with my family, whether I'm at a hotel in PA, whether I'm at an event. I mean, yeah, it's kind of getting to that point. It was at that point with Fetterman and Oz where people are just, they're inundated, right? And they're shutting it off. I say Kamala's message is pretty simple. You know, Trump is not for women's rights, and she is. And, you know, everything's about being anti-Trump, you know, and we need, you know, civility, and we need unity, and we need to moderate all the things that, you know, I feel like her message of socialism is quite the opposite. It's all government coercion, government force. And I don't really feel like she has a plan, but it's just running as the anti-Trump, which I do think is a big problem for her. I think people underestimate this whole idea that she is in the White House. And I know we talk about it, but I do think that penetrates with a lot more of these so-called swing voters than people realize. It's like, I think that was one of Trump's best messages when he ran in 2016. You guys have had 30, 40 years. You've been in government. Why didn't you fix it then? So I think that is an issue for her, but that's her whole thing, women's rights, and she's anti-Trump. I mean, if I had to boil it down, that's the message. And it's all this milquetoast rhetoric that they're trying to get people to believe. Trump's message is the border. Trump's message is inflation. We also see some ads, you know, dealing with the shooting, and some, I would call them hero ads, which I think do pretty well. But I think it's more important, and I don't mean this like he doesn't have to have a positive message, but I think this whole election is about defining Kamala Harris, both for her and for Trump. And I do believe this. When she jumped in, I said this to anybody. I said, if Trump wasn't the nominee or if Biden wasn't, whoever the replacement was, I don't care if it's a bump on a log, they would have went up 5 to 6 points. Yeah. And what I mean by that is just there's such a hatred. There's so much money that's been spent on why Biden's bad and why they think Trump's bad, period. I mean, there's billions of dollars. And so any alternative would have got that boost. I think she got it. She had her honeymoon period. I think that's leveled off completely. And now it is a race to define who she is. And I think I actually think the more time that goes on, she's going to continue to lose support, because I think anybody that is siding with her, they already have an opinion of Trump. Yes. And I don't think a lot of that's going to change. I think it's when people learn about her policies, or I should say lack thereof for a plan, I just don't think people are going to buy it. And the more they learn, the more they're going to have buyer's remorse, the more they're going to say, you know, maybe we don't want the current 4 years compared to what we had under Trump. But those are the messages we're seeing on the ground in Pennsylvania.
By the way, that's my read, Cliff, as well. That's what I've been saying for some time now. Dawson, pull up C3.
K-Wall for Life said, just donated on phchase.com. Keep up the good work.
There you go, K-Wall for Life.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. So I'm sure that obviously they had to dump Biden because they knew that. I mean, it was clear that he was going to lose. He was just too old, and people knew he wasn't with it anymore. But and maybe this was already a consideration, or maybe it was more of a shock. But what I have found, just talking with independent voter, Democrat voters, even older voters in my own local area, knocking for House candidates, is these people that are in their 70s, lifelong Democrats that were in the unions, carpet layers and city bus drivers and stuff. They were Democrats, because of the working class, and they don't like Kamala. Some of these people, I said, I voted for Biden. Biden was a, normal guy, they thought, but now he was too old. But Kamala is extreme. She's a communist. She's all these extreme things, and they don't like it. So they're losing. I think they're going to lose some of these older people, and maybe that's who some of these undecided voters are. They say, like, they maybe voted Democrat, but she's too extreme.
Yeah, I agree with that. Pull up C3 here, Dawson. This is, as of today, Real Clear Politics in the Battleground States. And just to kind of reemphasize how we started this conversation with Cliff, and this has been very good conversation, Cliff. Right now, it's got Trump, and by the way, this is all these are within the margin of error, I'm sure, of all the polls. But it has Trump up in Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. It's got Kamala up in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. So Pennsylvania within 1 point right now in Kamala's favor, which has been going down if you tracked it. Once again, this just emphasized it really comes down to Pennsylvania in this race, assuming, once again, Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, which it seems like that's the trend. Well, it looks like one person donated already. Appreciate that, K-Wall for Life. Cliff, we're going to stay in touch with you in the next 42 days or something like that?
40.
Is it 40?
I'm pretty sure if my math's right, we're down to 40 now. Is it 40 or 41? I mean, we're getting close.
Don't know.
For us, it's every day.
Every day. There you go. Exactly. Well, we appreciate it. We hope Trump wins in Pennsylvania. We don't hope the Eagles do much of the same this year.
Go Birds, baby.
Jeez. Someday we'll tell you about your fan base in Minnesota and why we are so upset with them. But hey, we're all Pennsylvania fans today. Thanks
Jake,
very much, Cliff.
I just want to say thank you to you, to Paul, to the whole crew. Action for Liberty. There's very few groups out there that fight the good fight, get the message out. Obviously, the Democrats are the enemies, but the Republican establishment cannot get a free pass. So keep at it, gents, and we'll work to make Liberty win. Appreciate y'all.
Take care, Cliff. All right.